Hi guys, Jamie with SavorySaver here. I share gluten-free recipes, tips, tricks, and resources to make your gluten-free lifestyle easier. Today I have a copycat recipe for you. It's gluten-free Pizza Hut Breadsticks. Now, if you're like my wife and even me, even though, as some of you may know, I am not gluten-free, but I do the cooking at the house, we're always looking for pizza that tastes close to pizza. Crust never tastes like crust that has gluten in it. So we're always looking for something that's close. Well, with these breadsticks, it's not exact, I can't lie, but it's pretty daggone close. We've made these a couple times now. Makes great breadsticks. So stick around and I'll show you how we're gonna do it. Okay guys, let's get started. First up, this recipe has been tweaked from an America's Test Kitchen gluten-free recipe. If you're new to gluten-free baking, or if you've been gluten-free for a long time, there are two cookbooks that are go-to for me when I'm starting to look for recipes. They're easy to follow. It tells you why their recipe works. I just think it's a really good resource. So if you're looking for gluten-free cookbooks, I would definitely check those out. I'll link down below to the books. So I've tweaked the recipe to make it work for breadsticks for us. Let's get started on this recipe so I can show you how to do it. So the first thing we need to do is we actually need to heat our oven. And what that's going to do is that's going to proof our dough for a few minutes. So I'm going to turn the oven on to 200 degrees. And before I do anything else, before I do the yeast or the ingredients, I'm going to let that proof to 200, and then we'll turn it off and we'll move forward with the next step. Okay guys, our oven has been turned on to 200. It's come up to temperature and I turned it off. And that's again is going to help us proof our dough. And one thing I do want to mention is that the oven racks are in the top third and the lower third of the oven. So I'll put a picture next to me so you guys can see what that looks like. That's how it cooks, because on the bottom rack we're actually going to put a pizza stone. We're not going to cook our breadsticks on the pizza stone, but the pizza stone will help that oven maintain a better temperature. So let's get started on our yeast. I am not good with figuring out 110 degrees hot water. So I've got a thermometer here. So you want it at 110. And if you guys have any tips or tricks to get me to 110 degrees without having to temp it, put them in the comments below, please, because I will greatly appreciate it. So to our warm water, we are going to add 1 packet of instant yeast. And we want that yeast to have something to feed on, so we're going to put in a tablespoon of white sugar. So we're going to put that in there. We're going to give it a stir. Once that's mixed up, we're going to put it off to the side for about 5 minutes for it to start working. That makes sure if there's bubbles at the end, we know we're good. If not, we need to start over. That'll also help since we're using flour that is crazy expensive. We want to make sure our yeast is good and we're not wasting all that flour. So we'll put that to the side while we're waiting on that to rise. I've got a 13 by 9 pan. This is what we're going to cook our breadsticks in. You could also use a 13 by 9 cookie sheet. I've done that before. It works great. So as long as it has a lip on it, you can do it in that. Today I'm going to use this. Guys, we want our breadsticks to be crispy on the bottom, so we're going to use some olive oil to help with that. So we're going to use about 3 tablespoons of olive oil on the bottom. It sounds like a lot, but we want to make sure it coats the bottom of the pan. I've done it with less and it didn't work quite as well, so I bumped it up some. And you want to coat that whole pan, so this is non-stick, so it's actually going around pretty easy. So I'm going to put that to the side. Now let's start measuring our ingredients. Guys, normally I would put this right in the bowl, but I want to show you how to measure this flour out. So this is Bob's Red Mill 1-to-1, and for this recipe I know it takes 2 cups. I will put in the description below, or actually the link to the recipe will have if you want to do it by weight. Flours are different when they're gluten-free. If you're have been gluten-free for a while, you know that nothing bakes the same. So your gluten-free flour may work differently than my gluten-free flour if you're not using Bob's Red Mill. I still think you should try the recipe. I think you should adjust it to how it fits your needs. But when you measure gluten-free flour, you want to make sure that we've given it a little mix, because it is a blend and we want to make sure everything's mixed up. And then we want it to go in lightly. So I like to spoon it into my measuring cup. And then I'm going to level it off. Which is a great thing to know, that if you're cooking by weight, you just measure the weight and you don't have to deal with the leveling it off. So there's 1 cup. I'm going to drop that into the mixer. There's our 2nd cup. We want to add 2/3 cup of oat flour. All that oat flour is ground oats. Make sure that you can have oats before you make this, or get the gluten-free oats and grind them up very, very fine. Because oats can have a cross-contamination, and some people have issues when they have oats. Once you have that measured out, you can put that in the bowl. Guys, the next thing we want to add is psyllium husk powder. And what that does is that helps bind everything. So that's going to give us a little bit of that gluten effect, since we don't have any gluten. So you're going to 1 tablespoon of that. I got this in the bulk section a while back at our local Sprouts, but I will link below if you don't have a way to access this in your area. So we want 1 tablespoon of that. The next thing we're going to add is some salt. You want 3/4 of a teaspoon, and this is a fine salt. You don't want to use the kosher salt for this, that's bigger flakes. And these need a little bit of salt in them. So we've got all that added. So now we want to give it a little mix just to blend everything up for 30 seconds to a minute. Now that we've blended our flour and our oat flour and all that, we want to add the rest of the stuff to our yeast and get everything blended up. So let's move over to the mixer. Okay guys, as you can see, our yeast is nice and bubbly. It's been about 5 minutes. We've got our dry ingredients that we've already mixed. So now we need to add a little bit to this yeast, and then we're going to start the mixing. So we want to add 1 egg, which is why I did it in this measuring cup, because we can just add that right in. And we're going to add 3 tablespoons of olive oil. Once we have our 3 tablespoons of olive oil in here, we make sure our mixer is locked. We're going to turn it on slowly, and we're going to slowly stream this in for about a minute until everything's mixed. And then we're going to bump the speed up to about medium high, and we're going to blend that for about 6 minutes, scraping the bowl down as needed. Okay guys, our dough has been mixed for about 6 minutes. As you can see, it's really thick, almost like cookie batter. So we're gonna get this in the pan, but before we do, if your kitchen's like my kitchen, there's mistakes that happen. So one of the things that I didn't tell you that I added was some xanthan gum. Now, Bob's 1-to-1 or King Arthur's 1-to-1, they have xanthan gum in them. So you don't need to add it typically to recipes if it's already in there. I did add extra because I want that little bit of security that it's gonna come out as more like bread. So I added a 1/4 teaspoon of that to my dry ingredients. So be sure when you get that recipe printed out that you actually pay attention to that part, unlike I did when I made it this time, but it is in there. And we wanna make sure, now that everything's in there and mixed, that our oil is spread out all over the pan, into the corners. And then we want to get as much of this batter into the pan. It's a very sticky batter, so it's going to want to fight, but we're going to win because breadsticks are worth it. All right, so we got the dough in there. I'm gonna rinse my hands off and then I'm gonna spread it out. So let me show you how I do that. Guys, I've rinsed my hands off, but I've not dried them because what I wanna do is spread this dough out, and wet hands will help with that. So start pressing it out. We want it to go as close to the edge as we can get. It'll push that olive oil back out. And then if you start noticing sticking, put a little bit of water on your fingertips. I've got a bowl next to me, and go back to spreading it. And you want to keep doing this until you get it into all the corners, and then flatten it out as best you can, or even it out as best you can. It doesn't have to be exact, but the more even that you do get it, the more even your breadsticks will be. We've got our dough spread out in the pan as best we can. Now I want to cover it and I want to put it in the oven to rise, which is why we proofed the oven earlier. So I'm just going to cover it with some plastic wrap. You want to make sure it doesn't touch the oven rack when you put it in there. If you think that's going to happen, if you have any clothespins or some chip clips that you can put on there to hold the sides down and keep it from touching. So guys, I'm gonna pop this in the oven on the top rack that I have in there, and we're gonna let it set for 10 minutes, and then we're gonna bring it back out and start cooking it off. Okay guys, it's been 10 minutes. Our dough has started to rise, so we're gonna take it out of the oven, put it on the counter for another 20 minutes while we preheat our oven. So we're gonna put our pizza stone in the oven now on the bottom rack. Our breadsticks will cook up here. We're gonna close the oven, set it for 475, and let that preheat for 20 minutes to allow our bread to rise more. And we're gonna do something to our breadsticks just before we put them in the oven. So I will be back with you in just a couple minutes. Guys, it's been 20 minutes. Our oven is up to temperature. So I wanna get these ready to go in the oven. So we're gonna take off the plastic wrap, and as you can see, it's risen a little bit, about 50% of what it was. And I'm gonna cut these into breadsticks now, and we're gonna see how that does. Now, the gluten recipes, it's both ways. I've seen them where you cut them first, I've seen them where you cut them after. We're gonna try it before and see how that does with our breadsticks. And it looks like it's pretty sticky, so I don't know how this is gonna go, but we're gonna try it anyway. So I'm using a bench scraper because it covers a little more area. And I think I'm probably getting cleaner cuts, especially with it being sticky. And they're not exactly the same size, but that'll be all right. And then the other thing I'm gonna do is I'm gonna cut it right down the middle. And if you didn't want to do this and just wanted to bake it as is, you can do that. And what you would do is just cut them with a pizza cutter. So guys, we are now gonna pop this in the oven. We're gonna put it in the oven at 475, which is what I preheated it at. But once I put it in there, I'm actually gonna drop it to 350 degrees. And what that's gonna do is that the oven's hot, but it's gonna give it a longer cook time. So we want it cooked through, and that's gonna help us with that. So I'm gonna put it in there. I'm gonna set my timer for 45 minutes, bump that heat down to 350, and we will be back just before these finish up, and I'll show you how to make the topping. Okay guys, it's been 45 minutes. Our breadsticks are baked. See how nice and golden they are? So now we need to make a topping for them, and then I'm actually gonna pop them back in the oven for just a few minutes, just so the topping can toast a little bit. So let me show you the topping, and we'll get it covered and put back in the oven. For our topping, we're gonna use a 1/4 cup of Parmesan cheese, and this is that stuff in the green container. Don't worry about using the fancy stuff for this. We're also gonna use a teaspoon of dried oregano. Guys, you wanna crush that a little bit in your hands, especially if it's been sitting in the cabinet for a while. We're gonna teaspoon of basil. Same thing, crush it a little bit. I'm gonna add a teaspoon of garlic powder. Teaspoon of onion powder. And about 3/4 teaspoon salt. Give everything a good mix. Break up any Parmesan cheese chunks that are in there. Once everything's mixed together, take our breadsticks. I've got 3 tablespoons of melted butter. I'm gonna spread it across the top. And you wanna season it with the mix. Now I'm gonna pop this under the broiler for just a couple minutes, just till it browns up a little bit. So let me do that, and I'll bring it right back out and we'll give them a test. Okay guys, I broiled the breadsticks for just a couple minutes till they were nice and golden. And let's give them a try. So you already have those cut marks, so they should cut a little easier. So I took one out of the middle here. I'm just gonna put it on the cutting board. I've got a little bit of just store-bought pizza sauce. You can make your own if you wanted. So these are piping hot. Steam's coming off of them. Guys, they really do have a good bread texture. There's tons of flavor from that Parmesan cheese and the herbs and the garlic. Guys, I think these are going to be a really good substitute since you can't go to Pizza Hut and get them. I do speak from experience. When we've done them before, they actually reheat pretty well. Just pop them in the oven until they're warm through. I did store them in the fridge, but reheating them, they were good the second day. You can see that how brown they are on the bottom. All that topping, nice and golden inside. Guys, if baking isn't your thing, or maybe it is your thing and you're just nervous about it being gluten-free and baking gluten-free because it is challenging compared to gluten baking, I think you should give this a try. I'll make sure the directions are easy to follow for you. If you like this video, please remember to like and subscribe. If you have any comments, I'd love to hear them. Thanks for watching, guys, and I hope to see you soon.